right. Welcome to the Ultra High Net Worth Clients Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Broadhead. Today, we have the rare pleasure of talking with former executive of Fortune 500 financial institutions and new author of an Amazon #1 new release, Michael E. Holden. Michael, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Good morning, Chris, and thanks for having me join today. I'm just arriving from a couple weeks in Fiji, and I
Oh,
couldn't be more thrilled to return back home and join you this morning to speak about my new passion. And
awesome.
I would actually correct myself and say not my new passion. It's always been a passion. Um, I felt a calling to write this book, The Authenticity Deficit, What Financial Advisors Need to Be Relevant. And
Mm,
just in my findings of various interactions with folks who've already read the book, is that this is a real issue that is not only in wealth management, but really across the world. Now, I've spent the past 25 years working in corporate wealth management. And I've had over 600 financial advisors, ranging from the lowest levels of production to the highest levels of production. And really, just in exchanging ideas with advisors through the years, there's a definite issue of authenticity and a deficit therein.
mhm. Awesome. Awesome. So, um, definitely a lot to dig in there, but I feel compelled to just come out swinging. What?
Yeah.
Why does this book need to be written, and why are you the person to write it?
Yes, that's a great question. I think why this book needed to be written, I did interview, say, close to 300 financial advisors,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, with the series of questions, all the same questions. And initially, what was fascinating was these were my direct reports of which I've made relationships with through the years. And I was always very close with my financial advisors. I would attend baptisms, I'd attend funerals, I would attend weddings, very much like advisors would for their clients. I've had the privilege of a quarter century of having financial advisors as my clients. And the first discovery I had was the questions that I asked were seismically different than the reports that our CEOs would give. An example would be no name CEO would put out a fancy gloss regarding an employee opinion survey and say the top bragging point was 100% of our financial advisors feel like we're doing something great for our clients and even greater for our communities. Well, when I had the opportunity within a circle of trust and confidentiality, I would submit to you that 100% of them said the polar opposite. And this translates into several other things. Well, what is the level of our quality of care for our clients? Do we feel like the product offerings we're recommending to our clients are the most robust offerings, are the best in class offerings, considering alternative solutions? And if from a top of a house corporate communication stance, that answer would almost always be absolutely. However, when you talk to the practitioner at the desk, you get a completely different answer. So that created this thrust for me that I just had a moral obligation to try to write this book. In my dedication, I dedicate the book to the financial advisors, and I say, this book is more yours than my own. Because in my mind, this book is a compilation of hundreds of advisors and their pain points paired with my experience as a manager to somewhat try to say, how do we create a pathway? I can't pretend to have the solutions to this, but I can say we can at least set a right foot forward to enhancing our quality of care and being a bit more honest with the recommendations and solutions that we're providing to our clients. Now, why me? That's a great question. It's a humbling experience. It's really hard and scary, to be honest, to write a book called The Authenticity Deficit without me giving the disclaimer that I myself am not perfect. But I myself have found myself in corporate America inauthentic at times. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you, I have recently resigned from my 25-year career. And I had shared with you, Chris, before coming to you with this book, I wrote the book and I somewhat came to a standstill. I really couldn't put any more effort into talking to the world about it. When it came time for me to discuss it, I found that I couldn't. And I found that
Mm.
I couldn't because as I continued to represent the chairs that I was in, if I was being honest with myself, I was inauthentic. And it becomes awful hard to discuss authenticity when you yourself are looking in the mirror, not feeling like you're authentic yourself.
Mhm.
And I feel very blessed to be here today, Chris, because I would say I do feel somewhat freed now that I'm no longer chained to the shackle of having to say what's appropriate for the benefit of the firm. And I feel empowered today coming on this on this session with each other, just to say, hey, I think now it's time for us to really talk about how are we treating our clients? How are we really treating our advisors? And for today, the encouragement is if you're an advisor, if you're a client, I think these are very relevant questions to ask. I will personally ask my doctor, do you feel like, without oversharing, I've had some severe health issues in my life. And I've gone to the doctors asking, are you supported to do your job the way you've been trained to help me get over my health issues? How many patients ask their clients that? And every time I've asked the doctor, their eyebrows go up and they're like, wow. And you know, I have been in situations where, hey, I'm glad you asked that. I wish I had this, right? Or I wish that the hospital I'm representing would allow me to do that. You know, and when I then say, well, I'm going to go, what hospital does do that? Oh, well, XYZ hospital. Great. I end up going there. Right.
Mhm.
And so this is maybe a shot across the bow for clients and practitioners to really question, are you allowed the autonomy to give the quality of care that your clients deserve? And that you as a practitioner, that your skills that you've acquired for so long, are you really allowed to thrive in the arena that's hired you to do your job?
Mhm. Yeah. Those are, that's a wild, situation. I love that question with your doctor. That's probably the first and last time he'll ever hear that or he or she. Uh,
Well,
so and
it translates to there's so much in my personal life. I have a daughter with severe epilepsy, and we
Mhm.
have been since age 3. She's 10 now. We have been in life or death decision making
Oh, wow.
for our child, and
Mhm.
you know this characterization of qualifying. Now, remember, this is my baby girl. So what I'm characterizing is qualifying who is going to give her the best treatment for her to continue to live was my utmost goal, was my
Yeah.
very reason for waking up every morning. And although this is an extreme parallel or comparison, honestly, we're no different for me to encourage clients to have the same grit and vigor with how advisors care for their wealth and accomplishing their goals. And so the encouragement, and let's just turn this to the practitioner with the same grit and vigor should ask, does my institution allow me to do my job for the best interest of my clients? Now, let's unpack that so it's not so 30,000-foot level. You have some retail banking institutions where the financial advisors can only represent what I refer to as the one tray of cookies. These are the products that you represent because this is what we told you to. These are the levels of risk tolerance and the buckets that they fit in because this is what we've issued, right? And this is just how you're going to operate. And oftentimes we get lower tenured advisors representing client needs that require higher tenure. But because the offerings are so limited and so streamlined, we somewhat just force these client needs within to the particular buckets issue. Okay. Now I would tell you, because I've represented these things professionally, is not this is not a blanket statement, but you do find many instances where there's a breach in quality of care. Or to go back to my medical illustration, medical malpractice. You can't just say, I'm going to give Tylenol to everyone because it hurts this way, right? And so ultimately, the next step would be, if you're in an independent wirehouse, is your compliance within, say, not an independent, no, a wirehouse, which is the big four, right?
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
when we really go into the weeds of the compliance in the wirehouse, somehow the compliance is lesser scrutinized for, say, some more firm, profitable products, and more scrutinized for the opposite. Well, is that really then compliance for best interest of a client? Or is that compliance for best interest of the firm? So we get into these goofy gray areas, which I'm encouraging both clients and practitioner to start getting aggressive upon, right? Because it's in both of your best interest. And for those who are like me with decades of experience into this almost sounds like it may be common sense. But Chris, for the amount of time that I've been doing this, I've never heard someone actually come out and say it. And so why me? I'm terrified. I don't think I'm the king of authenticity. I don't think I'm the champion of all champions. I'm really here in the essence of serving what I believe is the greater good.
mhm,
I've been able to operate for all these years with a totally clean record, because wealth management to me has been made easy by the following. I treat every single person that I interact with like they're my mother. And when I do that, it really takes out the gray areas. It makes things very simple. And the truth is, I I don't think our industry is approaching every client like it's their mother.
mhm.
And therein lies the pain point of the authenticity deficit and what advisors need to do to be relevant.
Yeah, I love that. Don't be surprised if that's the name of the title. That's or the name of the episode. Um, that's great. That's a beautiful philosophy, and really makes everything crystal clear on how to behave with your clients. Um, so you've mentioned this book can benefit advisors, it can benefit investors or clients. Like who specifically needs to read this, and what benefits will they come away with?
Yes. So far, I mentioned to you that I felt this book to be a calling. And I've not done anything. Chris, you're the first podcast I'm doing since I,
I'm honored, Michael. I'm
uh,
honored.
the honor is truly mine. And what I'll say is, somehow I've released this thing on Amazon, not marketed it whatsoever. Somehow it became an Amazon #1 new release. And I say somehow because I think I have a saying that God doesn't call on the equipped; He equips the call. And I opened with saying, I think this was a calling. And what I'm finding in feedback, I received a lovely letter from a psychologist in Mallorca, and it
Mm,
was fascinating. Where she said, I like my business is psychology. I really believe that 80% of investments are within your head first, and 20% are actually the mechanics. Loved that. And said, in reading your book, I felt like I was able to somewhat look through a keyhole and see how a coach speaks to financial advisors, which makes me better understand as an investor and a client what I should be asking of my advisors. On the flip side, I received some feedback actually on Amazon by an advisor that worked for me, and said, "I've been in the industry for 40 years. Michael was probably one of two managers in the 40 years that I trust and continue to trust. And I'm buying books. I'm buying these books to give to newer advisors so that they may have these concepts at the top of their mind as they progress in their career." Now, what's been a gift thus far is a new advisor, a senior advisor, a small producer, a large producer, a big client, a small client. People are reading these books and contacting me saying, I never thought to ask these questions. Let me give you an example. I started looking for a new advisor and started interviewing advisors after writing this book. And going through the journey of writing this book, I was like a different person at the table looking for new advisors. One of the questions I asked an $11 million group, so their trailing 12 is 11 million. You do the math on how many assets they manage. It's a large group. It's a two-person practitioner team at 11 million trailing 12. And I said, I just have an innocent question. I'd like to know how much dollars per year does a wholesaler contribute to your practice and what do you use it for? Their eyebrows went up. Whoa, well, I couldn't give you an exact dollar amount, but we primarily participate with XYZ. And I don't want to name company name. I said, well, great. We sat here for 2 hours. You've given me product recommendations based off the statements I gave you. What percentage of company XYZ is in your recommendation? Now they're like, oh, right. And so these are questions that I'm encouraging both advisors to consider and clients to consider, right? And I just think this level of transparency is required to be authentic, right? And authenticity is, look, I've gone to too much school. I jokingly say, I live in Chicago. There's very cold winters here. I jokingly say I've acquired so much certification that if my house ran out of heat in the Chicago winter, I could burn all of them and get through one winter. Right. And certification's good. I'm not knocking it, but it's interesting that none of this was ever taught in a curriculum whatsoever. And so the example of, well, what percentage of the holdings that are giving you money for what is in your recommendation to me? Well, just tell me why. So authenticity, $10 word, became a 50-cent word. I think we're throwing around a very valuable word now too loosely. And in a nutshell, my challenge for all listeners is when we say authenticity in the context of what I'm trying to propose is when we get to the moment on the practitioner side where we stop asking ourselves, what's in it for me, right? And when authenticity becomes this notion of how can I serve you? How can I serve you? And the gap of the distance between what's in it for me, between how can I serve you is your AQ, your authenticity quotient, right? And I'm almost done with my website. The website will come with an authenticity quotient calculator. And it'll give you a grade on what's your level of AQ. And Chris, just to jump into that really quickly, I'm fascinated by this notion of AQ. So in the early 1900s, we were blessed with this quotient called IQ, the intelligence quotient. And the IQ was a condemnation. You were either smart or dumb, right? And and there's kids at recess, maybe not today, but maybe in our generation, Chris, that would say, I have a higher IQ than you. And there was really nothing you could do about it, right? Outside of maybe cheating on the test. But then in the early 2000s, they gave us the EQ, which was the emotional quotient. And I would say I'd advocate for EQ. I studied it formally. I have some accreditations as a corporate coach utilizing EQ frameworks and strategies. It works. The reason why EQ became, I believe, popular was if you work towards it, you could get better, right? If you utilize the frameworks and put your mind to, am I illustrating a higher or lower level of EQ? Well, you could get better. And that was hopeful and that was great. Well, now for the first time, I am proposing this notion of the AQ, the authenticity quotient, and very loosely stated, it will be the level of truthfulness to yourself. And not to be cheesy or woo-woo, my hope, and maybe the fundamental reason of why I feel called to talk about AQ is that if all of us learn by frameworks and exercise to be truthful with ourselves, And all of a sudden, we learn in that truth to be more comfortable in our skin. And we use that comfort to be a little bit more kind. Well, honestly, Chris, I think there's a hope for making the world a better place. With everything that we've gone in geopolitical events and the C word, which we don't even need to say, there's been a true deficit in what was once our social contract of how we worked with each other and cared for each other and communicated with each other. And I think really the only way for us to bridge the gap in this situation that we're in is to start inward. And I believe it was, I spent some time in Israel. I read a quote from Einstein in the University of Jerusalem, where it ultimately said, if you're so bold to try to change the world, you must first start with what? Changing your mind. And there you go. There's if we can be so bold to try to change the world of wealth management and really add value to our client experience, to our investor experience, and really to fulfill the hearts of our practitioners who have been working round the clock straight for the past how many years. If we can really embolden authenticity and quality of care within ourselves first, I think that's the first step to changing the game to where it's supposed to be.
Mhm. Amen, brother. You got a believer in me, man. You are preaching my thoughts exactly. So, to get into the nuts and bolts of this, how can an advisor embody authenticity? And, you know, if an advisor wants to improve their authenticity, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think step one is being true to thyself. And you have to be
Mhm.
honest with yourself. And only you can audit your level of honesty. Only you can do that. And then you just have to start asking yourself just quite very simple questions. If you were one of the couple hundred advisors that I interviewed, and one of the questions was, do I authentically feel like my firm makes communities better? And such an overwhelming amount of people said, no, hell no, right? But you're in such a bureaucratic environment within your firm that when your CEO asks you that, you go, oh, yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah. Ooh, well, that's a red flag. Number two, when you're sitting with a new prospective client and you're looking at their statements and you see that the advisor, uh, your competition advisor has so much more autonomy to run the client's assets than you do. Are you still pitching them anyway? Right? If you see that they are it. So I guess to answer your question, step one, be honest with yourself. Step two, it's time to scrutinize the company you're working for. And it's time to be honest that you're representing the full depth and scale of what your capabilities are. For example, let's talk about discretion, right? If you're an advisor, you know what I'm talking about. If you're sitting in a retail bank, and most of you, at least from my experience, are running several hundreds of millions of dollars for clients in your community, and you don't have discretion. So say you have 1,000 households and you need to do a critical portfolio rebalance for your clients. Well, you know as well as I know that you need to make 1,000 phone calls. How good is your quality of care when you've got to make 1,000 phone calls? But have you asked why your bank will not give you discretion? You know it as well as I do. Takes away from the bottom line, right? Takes away from the bottom line to the bank. Now, when you're an advisor who does have discretion and you do have 1,000 clients, you're able to de-risk the portfolio in one click of a button. Well, I know as a client, I demand rapid response. That's why I'm paying you, right? I demand that you are looking at my portfolio with the time I do not have. So what are we really doing when I'm sitting with the bank-based advisor who does not have discretion and has to make 1,000 phone calls before he gets to little old me, versus being with the other person who has the discretion that I, as the client, sign off for? I actually get a cheaper management fee for it, and I'm getting a more robust offering of different solutions. I mean, where's the authenticity in that? Right. So,
Mhm.
number one, be honest with yourself. Number two, I think you got to be honest with your skill set as an advisor. Could you even do discretion? There's people that are 20 years, 30 years, 40 years running multi-million dollar practices, never having represented discretion in their lives. In my mind, if I compare your quality of care as an advisor with no discretion and 500, 600, 700 households compared to an advisor with 5,000 households, you're going to lose every time. You're going to lose every time because I need to know that I'm getting active response, active pivoting, whatever needs to be done. I need to know that you're going to count me in equal part as the rest of your households. What do you think about that,
That's
Chris?
yeah. I think that that sounds right on the mark, man. I agree. Um, can I'd like to know that this book. It's obviously coming from a deep place inside of you. It sounds like this may have been a career, like a struggle, with your day to day career since day one. 25 years later. So I mean, this sounds like this just exploded out of you. Can you talk about the changes you're trying to start or even fully realize within the industry?
Yes, I've been very fortunate. I would say I was very blessed. I'm very lucky. My 25 years, I've been very lucky to have accomplished the results I've accomplished. I'd submit to you for the whole 25 years, if I wasn't top 5%, I was top 10% in the firm almost always. And I would look at it as a quality of care. I would treat my practitioners like my book of business. Without getting too much into it, but there's been a few times where I've been awarded for being a top manager. To this day, I keep in touch with a substantial portion of people who I've worked with. And it's not that it exploded. I did have a time that I was able to translate this ideology to my regions and my territories. Half of my career, I was a practitioner myself. So half of my career, I was a banker, a business banker, and a financial advisor. And there was actually a time where I was a regional lending manager, which still was an individual contributor role. And then the other half of my career was being a senior leader. And so it really worked out well until it just became this pain point where I said, you know what? I started watching advisors from across the street, advisors that I'm interacting with, messages from the top of the house where we were just getting further and further and further away from the quality of care. And I saw that I'll call it my management treatment, where my management treatment, although in my opinion, we were driving outcomes successfully and in the correct way. Clients actually coming first and getting solutions, but by being relevant and providing value. I decided that, I think it's time to try to take this message to clients, investors, and to financial advisors, honestly, with the intent of impact, because we are not owned by large companies. We actually are the reason why large companies are large, right?
Hmm.
And so I think we've lost sight of when we hold hands, we hold the power, right? And
Mm.
so all the advisors that I've worked with, I mean, these people are of high integrity. These people have gotten into this game with an express intent of helping people. Well, if you have this express intent of helping people, but your firm's getting in the way, that's the last step, right? We said, be honest with yourself, question your firm. And then here's where authenticity becomes the most challenging. If you're in a spot that doesn't afford you the autonomy that you know how to do to really add value to your clients, you need to go. You just need to go, right? And that's not an easy statement, but that's just the candid truth that I feel a compelling moral obligation to share with the world.
Mhm. As you're speaking here, this is eerily reminiscent. My cousin, who is more like a sister to me, she was diagnosed about 2 years ago with stage 4 colon cancer. And, much like yourself, she went to her doctor and said, Is this what the protocol you would give your mother?" And the doctor swore up and down that he would, and she got a couple other, opinions and standard of care, and, smash cut to 2 years later, she is, cancer-free.
Oh,
um, she's lost 100 pounds, she's healthier than before her diagnosis, and if she had done the standard of care her original doctor had offered, she would be dead. And just everything you're saying seems, kind of the cut from the same cloth. So I just felt compelled to share that you were um decreasing cancer in the advisor space
oh
to some
my.
extent.
Chris, without going too much into it, I myself have had cancer, and
Mhm.
I have been in that similar situation. And wow, thank you for sharing that. That just touches my heart. That is really the full thrust of why I'm here today, is because we just can't have, I'm using the analogy medical malpractice. But we are, in a way, we're somewhat the medical solution providers for wealth management, right? We still have to diagnose, we still have to give recommendations, and we still have to carry our solutions through to goal, right? It's not exactly the same, but there is a parallel to it, and that's why this is so important, right? Is you have
Mhm.
to be authentic with yourself, and too much now in the corporate world is, what do I get out of it? Right? We need to bridge the gap of, what do I get versus how do I serve? And right here, right now, that gap it's unacceptable.
Mhm. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Um. Okay. So, just from I guess uh further out, can you share kind of your thoughts on the dangers of inauthenticity and the benefits of authenticity?
Yes, I'll give you another analogy. I just lost a friend to stage 4 stomach cancer,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
oh my god, my goodness, he was so instrumental in encouraging me to write this book. Uh,
Hmm.
And what I'll tell you is, he called me 9 months prior to formal diagnosis. And he said, Mike, you're one of the most positive guys in my life. I just want to share with you. Um, I just went to the emergency room. I don't know what happened, but my stomach filled with liquid. And I said, well, what? And my friend is a very healthy person, very healthy, uh, very tall, lanky fella. And for him to say they took out 3.5 liters of liquid from his stomach was alarming to me. And so he said, well, but I just feel down. I don't really know what happened, but I went to the ER. They drained the liquid. Everything's peachy keen. Like, I'm going on my way. And I said, well, friend, you're encouraging me to write this book on authenticity. And I wouldn't be a good friend if I didn't tell you that I'm concerned that you might have cancer. And he's like,
Mm,
what? What? They didn't say that in the emergency room. I'm like, well, yeah,
mm,
because it's no different than you walking into a bank saying you want product XYZ and that's all they give you. Right. Like, you need a plan, buddy. And this buddy of mine was a senior executive, very senior executive of a Fortune 500 company that everyone in the world knows. And
mm,
so I said, you need a holistic assessment. And given your level as an executive for your firm, I know you have a critical care team. My friend goes, what? Call HR, ask about your critical care team, and let's get you to that team. So you're not just fixing the stomach, we're looking at the whole body. Lo and
mhm,
behold, within 2 weeks, I get a call. Well, I have stage 4 stomach cancer, right? Okay. That's a whole lot different than when you went to the ER and they took out the 3.5 liters of your stomach, correct? Yes, correct. Well, now we need a plan that encompasses the entirety of not only your body, but also your wife and 3 children, right? Because now we need to, I mean, this is serious, right? And this is very grim. And I have to be honest. I set the probability of surviving your diagnosis. I'm not a doctor, but I'm not a stranger to these conversations.
Mm,
Friend, the probability of surviving your diagnosis is really low, right? And now we need to categorize what's happening with your wife, what's happening with your kids, what are you doing with your days, and what is the level of fight that we are going to put into this journey that God's putting in front of you, right?
mhm,
And, I would say I've known this friend of mine for 15 years. We spoke at least once a week for 15 years, if not many, many more times. And I never really knew his wife. All of a sudden, I'm doing conference calls with him, his wife. I'm meeting his 3 sons. My mother is attending these calls. My wife is attending these calls. And we really wrapped ourselves around my dear friend. And without getting too far into it, we really got into our mutual faith and our religion together. And we really started to pray with each other and all of a sudden became a community with each other and really started to understand the holistic situation that he was in.
mhm.
And we lost my friend. And,
Sorry.
but what I will tell you is this. He started his journey by having a practitioner that wasn't exactly inauthentic, but that was only operating within the confines of the institution they were representing. That's a very important point. So I'm not saying the first practitioner, the first experience was inauthentic. I'm saying that practitioner just fixed the problem that he came in with, right? And there was no holistic attention to recommendations needed. And then
Yeah.
once we finally went to an institution that affords that their cadence is the holistic solution, we were able to treat and get 9 more months, right? We were able to give a holistic, I call it well, let me not say because it's a hospital name, but the holistic quality of care that encompassed it all, including the wife and the children, right? And then all of a sudden, everyone collectively was prepared for a horrible situation, right? I'm not saying everyone walked out happy with smiles and peaches and cream and confetti, not at all, right? But there was a plan that my friend deserved, right? There was a quality of care that he deserved, and then some, right? Now therein lies the danger. Therein lies the danger that if you as a practitioner are in a firm where all you can do is just take the a la carte order, well, what happens when your clients really need you? And if you're the client where all you have is the a la carte order, what happens to you when you're in trouble, right? So, I mean, this is really, this is a very important, critical point to make if you have a wealth manager, if you're looking to invest, if you're a client. Am I getting the quality of care that my needs require? I would say, because I act from the standpoint of already my mother, right? Like, is my mom getting what she deserves? And I think my mom deserves the world.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That is I'm gonna introduce you to my cousin. I think you guys see the world very very similar, and I'm very very relieved to hear you were able to you know recover your health after your cancer scare as well. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, yeah. Um awesome, man. Well, my questions seem silly after after that. My next questions.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah. Um hmm, let's- I have one for you. And this one, this is a bit of a curveball. We can cut this part out of the interview if you don't feel comfortable answering this. But just out of curiosity, what has been the toughest part of advising and managing advisors for you to maintain your authenticity?
Hmm. I have to think about this. And, I think part of my journey is to not cut out these types of questions and to, in full faith, be as honest as I can. Um, I have been in situations where I believed in the mission of advisors, where I did have a very large producing advisor who said to me he felt a call. He actually initially thought he was going to go to be a priest, but
Mm,
felt called to become an advisor, to be a truly an advocate for clients' wealth and their wealth goals. And he's probably one of the most remarkable men I've met in a really long time because he sincerely believes his job as a financial advisor is a vocational calling. And where things get difficult for me, or where I have felt inauthentic, is if the firm didn't like a maneuver he made or didn't like a rationale for a recommendation he made. So, an example, he would make a recommendation that wouldn't coincide with the current firm's compliance box. And maybe that actually didn't make sense, right? Maybe, I believed his recommendation was in the best interest of the client. I'm experienced enough to know that I could back that legally, right? And I believed in my practitioner. Well, compliance didn't like it because that was the flavor of the day of their compliance. And all of a sudden, then you're in an instance where you know that's the right thing for the client, but the quality of care is breached because of the flavor of the day in compliance. Does that make sense?
mhm. Yeah.
O- Oftentimes, let's just unpack that a little bit more clearly. Sometimes, if a firm owns the product or if a firm gets a better payout on the product, they will make the compliance easier for the practitioner to issue. Sometimes,
Mhm,
not all the time. Other times, if there's a lesser spread of return for the firm, they'll make it harder for the practitioner to provide that solution, for the practitioner to provide that solution. So even though it may be best interest for the client, my practitioner is having a harder time getting it to the client because it takes away from the bottom line of the firm. Now, let me be very clear. Out of 1,000 times in these big firms, that maybe happens 2 or 3 times. But those 2 or 3 times are enough to keep me up at night and bring this up.
mhm. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Michael, this has been a freaking barn burner, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. Uh, I could definitely continue asking you questions, but I will respect your time and just we'll wrap it up with one or two more questions. You know, we've had a lot of advisors on the show. Um, I'm sure we've had managers of advisors, but I never really dug into that. So I'm just very curious. For any of those advisors out there who have managers or managers out there of advisors, are there any you know strategies or philosophies you incorporated to support and help your advisors to deliver their best work?
Yes. For any of my advisors watching today, you know me well. No matter how many years it's been, you know me very well. And my encouragement to everyone is that if you stand in the shadow of, say, evil, and you stand in the shadow long enough, behold, you cast the very same shadow, right?
Mhm.
And for years and for years and for years, the mantra for a financial advisor with their respective managers were, all I have to do is wait, and that manager will be gone in a couple of years anyway. And that's true. That's true, right? Because they either move the managers around. Most managers are in the game to get promoted, right? And In general, it's my experience that advisors tend to not trust their managers.
Mhm.
If you're in that environment, what are you doing? Right? If you don't and if you're standing and, oh, this person's just out for their own gain, but they command a license that supervises your practice, what are you doing? Right? And if you thought for all these years that, oh, well, they'll be gone in 2 years. And in fact, they are. But again, I ask you, what are you doing? And again, I will encourage you to say, I'll encourage you to just imagine yourself standing in their shadow. Imagine them in front of you. Imagine their shadow on the ground. Imagine you standing right there in their shadow. You have the same shadow. It's time to start getting real. And it's time to start holding everything around you accountable as you look to command the quality of care, to love and serve and protect your clients, because that's what we do when we do it right. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that fully answers the question, Chris, but as you could tell, I feel pretty fired up about it.
You are very, very passionate about that subject as well, which I appreciate and respect. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome, Michael. This has been a freaking blast, man. Um, I was, you know, I was very excited about having you on the show because I think that your perspective was very fresh and exciting, and I think a lot of the listeners are gonna resonate with that. So, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, man. This was a blast.
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate it. And, I have to do the shameless plug and show you the book.
Please.
It is on Amazon. Books, they don't exactly like quote pay the bills. I'm not looking to be a
Mhm.
salesperson on the book. I'm really looking to answer the calling that I've received and open as many minds as I can to start asking these questions, because we've lost sight of the fact that the power resides with us. And it's time for us to take the power back and demand that there are standards to the quality of our care, right? So I'll leave you with this. There are standards and there are metrics. And right now, everyone lives in a world where metrics supersede standards. And just apply that statement to, I don't know, going to a hospital, going to a restaurant, right? When you go to a hospital, you have a required standard of cleanliness, correct? When you go to a restaurant, a required standard of sanitation with the preparation of your food, right? But right now we live in a world where you go to, say, a hospital, and the priority is how quickly can I turn over the bed to be most profitable? Metrics.
Mhm. Mhm.
When you go into some restaurants are getting better, but some restaurants are more well, how about this? So metrics oriented that standards no longer exist. And so the
Mhm.
encouragement for you, everyone, is to be relentless about standards. And that'll just bring us back to where we need to be.
Mhm. Love it. Love it. And where can my audience find out more about you and your book and everything you're working towards?
Yes, thanks. I opened by saying I'm just starting. I'm coming back. I feel recharged. I do feel like I'm in a spot to represent this very scary topic to represent. I am on LinkedIn. I'll be redoing it. I'll put my new website on there. I'm like moments away from finishing it. And, and the book is currently on Amazon. Oh,
Mhm.
and I will finish the audiobook within the next 2 or 3 weeks here.
Great. Are you narrating it yourself with that silky smooth voice?
Oh my goodness, Chris, I love it. You had me at hello, but yes, I am. Yes, indeed. Yes, I am.
Love to hear it. We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And Michael, thank you so much for taking the time, man. This was a pleasure.
Honestly, the pleasure was mine. Thank you so much for blessing me with this time, Chris. And I
Yes.
look forward to keeping in touch with you.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. And to our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in and keep on growing out there,
I don't
everybody.
ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow